First question I have for you, Ed, is since Shacknews was founded in 1996, we're reflecting on the industry and what it was and how it's changed since then, obviously drastically. What are some development practices you used in 1996?
96 was it's interesting you started in that year. That was a really critical year for me because I had worked as a programmer and manager of bigger and bigger teams of programmers at Microsoft for 10 years. And in 1996, I had a chance to get promoted one more notch and run a business. And what that meant was I had to, for the first time, just leave programming behind as my job because I was going to be the business guy. And I looked all over the company. I said, the job I really want is to run the games business. I wrote games when I was a kid in high school. I love games. I play games all the time. And they told me I was crazy. They told me I was committing career suicide. Vice president said, why would you leave office, one of the most important parts of the company, to go work on something no one cares about? That's what they told me in 1996. So I'm not exactly answering your question, but that's what I remember is that being the moment where I was brave enough to do what I cared about, what I was passionate about, rather than what other people thought would be the best career for me.
Well, I think you did, though, because it's interesting. Like we talked about a little bit before the interview, my dad hated video games. Like a lot of people, especially people in the corporate world, looked at those as like toys, right? It was for kids. Right. There's no money in that. It's kids games. You know what I mean? Right. Like how much has that's changed over years? Comical. But speaking to that, how have those practices back in 1996 changed at all since then?
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of game developers these days because I run a venture fund and I work with a lot of game startups, and I'm just constantly reminded how the game business gets more difficult every year. I mean, it was hard in the old days, but now you have to be an expert on client server, cloud stuff, I mean, yeah, it's easier to get your game on a store shelf. Well, of course, there's no store shelves, but
no store shelf, yeah.
On Steam or whatever, or on the App Store. That part's easier, but getting people to actually pay attention to it has always been hard, getting the marketing side of things. And then just the technology breadth and the expectations of customers and the number of games that come out. I get an email that shows me how many new games are on Steam every week, and it hovers between 150 and 200 every week. So, it's a challenge to be a game developer. I'm always, that's why I love to work with them. They're amazing people in their field. Some of the most talented people in the world, I think.
Passionate too. I mean, it's a labor of love, like they have people doing multiple things on projects where you have, your AAA directors who make Justice League, whatever, like they're AAA, but they're not doing everything, they're directing, right? Like you have people who are coding, doing art, doing netcode, advertising, doing interviews, like they're doing all of it because they love doing it.
Yeah, that's, I was giving some advice to somebody in the last week where they had an idea for a game and they wanted to find someone to create it, and they found a team that will make any kind of game. You just pay them enough and they'll make it. And I'm like, okay, don't work with them. You got to find somebody who's super passionate about the same thing you're super passionate about. That's the only way you're going to really have a chance to make something great.
What modern development practices do you feel are superior to the ones you used like 10, 25 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm old school, like I wrote Halo 2600 in 2010. That was so much fun for me to go back and work on, the Atari 2600, which was just like all hand assembly language. That was super fun to me. Right over here, just off camera, I've got a PDP-11 that I've been playing around with, and I've got a PDP-8 over in the corner. Somebody asked me to research some of the earliest Easter eggs, so I was tracking down some that run on these old machines. So I'm into that old stuff. I'm not the best person to ask about modern development practices. I'm kind of my kids are sick of hearing me complain about object-oriented programming. I'm like, they get off my lawn when it comes to object-oriented programming. We didn't need any of those objects back in the old days. So definitely, I'm definitely not the guy to ask that question.
Since 1996, we've gone from PlayStation 1 to 5, and Xbox had Xbox had 4 models, all differently named.
Randomly named.
And Nintendo dominating the handheld market with their Switch, and PC hardware continuing to just drive technology and become cheaper and more powerful. What are some trends over the past 25 years that you remember as being steps forward for the industry in terms of development, business, marketing, distribution, anything like that?
Yeah, well, for me, the really big change happened kind of in the mid to late, between like say 2005 and 2015, say right in that range, where before that, it looked like we were headed to a kind of AAA apocalypse in the sense that, the little publishers were getting eaten by the big publishers, the little developers were getting eaten by the big developers. We were working on version 17 of such and such a game or whatever. And, games were getting so expensive and so risky to make that there was just not a lot of innovation happening. And, it's just like if you followed the trend, it didn't look very good for the game business. And then a whole bunch of stuff happened all at once. So you had Apple, come out with a platform that actually, first mobile phone that really people wanted to write games on, and an app store so people could distribute games. You had other digital distribution, obviously Valve creating Steam, and all of a sudden, it was kind of like, for me, like going back to the early 90s when games were made by small teams. All of a sudden small teams again could make a game. It didn't have to involve hundreds of people and tens of millions of dollars. And so of course we saw an explosion in the mobile game business. We also, around that same time, also started to really see much more globalization of the game development business. So China, which had been a market a lot of people up till then had said, oh, they'll never be gamers, really emerged as huge gamers. And big game publishers out of China created, lots of more funding into the game business. So now I think we have a much healthier ecosystem for gaming around the world. And you can really see that in the growth of the game business. You've got free-to-play games, which was another invention that happened around that time as well. Games didn't have to charge money up front. They could charge money as you went along and as people got more into them. And so all these different things ended up sort of happening and really diversified the game development space. You still have super AAA games, and people are going to play, God of War 19, whatever, or Mario, whatever, and and that's great. I play those games too. I love them. They're some of the best, best crafted games in the world. When you get hundreds or team of 1,000 people working on stuff, they can do things no one else can. But I also just love, an indie game, something made by a couple people. I think of the Risk of Rain guys here in Seattle, 3 guys who put together a game and can make a great business for themselves. Or Stardew Valley, written by one guy who did everything, one amazingly talented guy. So, now we're in a place where our teams can be all sizes, people at all sorts of different platforms, and we're reaching all kinds of different age groups, and so really, I think that's why the game business is finally, I've been saying this for a long time, but I think finally going to be the biggest media business in the world. We've been the fastest growing media business for quite a while, growing at about 10% year over year. And this last year, we grew more like 25%. And so yeah, and I really think that's because we now service everything, from games that are completely free to games that are, buy them in a box. Sure, buy a collector's edition for $100, and everything in between, and all kinds of gamers, all kinds of games. That's what we want the game industry to be about.
So what industry changes have surprised you the most over the last 25 years? And that can be like development or business practices or what have you.
Yeah, I'm always surprised by what happens in the game business. I think that's one thing I've learned is that it's dangerous to predict the future, So it's like my venture fund is set up to make 50 bets on 50 game developers around North America and Europe, and that way I don't have to try to guess what's going to happen next. I think it's really hard. Would Connect be successful? Would VR be successful? Would AR be successful? And especially just what games are going to be successful, what platforms, what genres. I gave a talk to the guys at PUBG and I showed them a bunch of historical data about different genres emerging and how unusual PUBG was really when it came out. How to have a game be that big, all their competitors had been around for, like 20 plus years, those genres, and they created something new and it took off incredibly, So I don't I don't know about what surprised me. I guess I'm just I guess I've just stopped trying to guess what's going to happen. I don't know. Maybe Rock Band if I had to go back a little ways. Maybe Guitar Hero and Rock Band. You know, because what happens isn't so much that like what happens in the game business isn't so much about like what new thing is going to happen. It's more like people have this sort of unfortunate memory of things they tried to do in the past and failed. Like, and this is really true in like the big publishers. It's like, oh, you know, like there was well-known industry wisdom that you couldn't sell a game with a piece of hardware attached to it because Nintendo tried to do that with a memory expansion for the N64, you know, in whatever, 1980 something. And so, and then something like Guitar Hero / Rock Band, which basically the same people, comes out and blows that all away. And we're like, okay, so that rule of thumb doesn't work. And so I think that's mostly what we've done at this point, is like we're knocking off all the rules of thumb, you know, of things that don't work. We're finding a way to make them work.
Gaming hardware and software have changed in so many ways since 1996. What aspects of the industry do you feel need more work before we turn our attention to what comes next? Yeah,
so you know, I'm one of the board members of the IGDA Foundation, and we really focus on diversity in the game business. And I just think that's, you know, something that we can still make a lot of progress on. And I know it's a controversial topic with some people, but I just think it's super important for us becoming the biggest media business in the world. You know, we need to have all kinds of people making games for all kinds of people if we're going to reach everyone. And I think it's just as simple as that. And, you know, the game business started with, you know, people like me, you know, white privileged geeks who, you know, were lucky enough to have access to a computer. Not very many people had one, right? And you know, and a lot of us are still around, you know, and so, you know, we need new voices and you know, new ideas, and that's only going to come from getting more new kinds of people who look at the world differently involved in the business.
So, Ed, where would you like to see video games go in the future?
See, now I told you I don't like to predict the future. And
that's true.
You're going to ask me the future.
Take lightning strikes, you know, like that's what I'm trying to do.
You know, for me first, the big milestone, you know, and then I'll be ready to die. I'll be like, okay, once this happens, it'll be like, okay, it's all good. It was really this point that we've been talking about this whole interview is when do games become, you know, the biggest media business in the world? And like I said, I think that's coming soon. Beyond that, you know, to me that's victory. It's like, what are you going to do beyond victory? Well, let's win first. You know, I want to win. I want the game industry to win. I want all the players to win. And you know, because I believe that the video game business is, you know, it's the most powerful form of media in the world. You know, it's interactive. It's you know, you can learn. You can be in charge. You know, it's like you read a book or watch a movie. You're watching someone else's story. You play a game. You know, it's your story. You're creating it. You're making it happen. And that's where I think the power comes from. It puts, you know, the audience in control. So yeah, that I think is the goal, that we become the biggest media business in the world, and then we all have a big party and celebrate.
It's inevitable. But if corporate America has taught me anything, it's like even when you win, you're not winning well enough. You have to win more, right?
Well, it is a hyper-competitive business. That, like we talked about earlier, there'll still be tons of competition, and that's what you want. I mean, if you're a customer, you want your competitors fighting with each other. You know, I think it was good for the business when we launched Xbox, and you know, we were the first American game console in over 20 years when we launched. You know, the business was really controlled by the Japanese at that time. And you know, since then, that competition has only made more and better games for gamers. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I want to congratulate Shacknews just because I'm really thankful that they're here. You know, and as someone who makes stuff, you know, the best thing you could imagine is that 20 years after you made it, people were still talking about it, still, it was still affecting their lives, making them happy. You guys just did this awesome David Craddock series that I know he put a huge amount of work in, called Bet on Black, about the history of the original Xbox as we come up on our 20-year anniversary for Xbox this fall. And you know, not that many sites would do that. And so I really love that you guys not only do the short form stuff that everybody does, but also invest in those long form pieces that I think are really critical to preserving the history of the game business. I mean, I don't know how many dozens and dozens of people David interviewed for that long article. So I just want to say thanks for what you guys do, because it's super flattering for someone who makes things to have people still be talking about them long after we made them.